No, you can't. Oh.
There you go.
All right. So,
I put it in the Slack. It's in Docs. It's in Google Docs.
Okay. I'm not sure how that's going to help, but.
You should be able to open it. This is not your, okay.
Hold on a sec.
I'll get into Zoom.
Is it on this Slack here? Yeah, I can't get to your Google Docs.
You can't get to my Google Doc. I'm sorry. I thought you were on your laptop there.
Should I shut this one down?
That's okay. I'll do it on here.
Well, I'm going to mute this then.
I'm live. I'll just share the screen.
There it is. You can join without video or audio, I guess.
And I have to update. Okay. Okay.
No, you don't want to. Oh, okay.
I forgot that I wanted to open the meeting. What? Bridges. Bridge. What's the meeting password? All right, and we're unmuted there, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I want to share screen. Yeah, let's just share everything. Share. Done. All right. So some stuff that I've been working on in the last 3 months or so and it's a kind of a continuation of a longer term project, has been augmenting our certificate loading support so that we can do some groovy things with plugins. And I've sent something out on the mailing list earlier, and there's an open source PR. Things have evolved a little bit since then, so this is kind of an update. And this is probably stuff, yeah. So anyway, so certificates and ATS, just a refresher, remember there's 2 kinds of certificates that ATS deals with. ATS provides server certs to the user agent, so that's the stuff that gets loaded up with SSL multi-cert config. And then ATS can also provide client certs to the origin if the origin asks for that. And there's a global records.config entry, and you can specialize that via conf remap, and the SNI YAML also lets you specify that. So current state of the world, this is ATS loads the core, loads these certs and keys from disk on process start and on config reload. And that works. Some downsides though, if the certificate changed on the disk, it's not like ATS is going to notice that and say, oh, there's a new version of foo.m. You have to explicitly restart the process or do a config reload. And the request for having it automatically figure out that there's new stuff that should be loaded is the hot load problem, right? You don't want to hot load and detect certificate changes and have it just come in magically. Another issue that we've run into is if an organization, say Verizon Media, manages their certs and keys elsewhere, then there's gonna, like in some centralized server thing, then there must be another step to take the certs and the keys from that centralized server, get them onto the disk with your ATS server. So each step introduces delay and error and keeps our DevOps folks in business. So those are some of the downsides. Those downsides are very organizational specific, right? How Verizon Media manages their certs and keys varies a lot from how Apple or AT&T or anyone else does that. So it seems very business-specific, business logic. So having some tools via a plugin seems like a good way to go to specialize, personalize the ATS to work within the organization to more efficiently work with certs and keys. So I would say this is a follow-on to work that we've done, like last year or probably 2 years ago. I don't know, time kind of floats. Not going? Zayun or Dairock? That was
Dairock, yes.
Dairock. He added some plugin interfaces that allowed this dynamic hot loading of client certs and server certs and keys. And this would allow for hot loading of client and server certificates. So there's the SSL cert, client cert update and SSL server cert update. And those were given pointers to paths on disk. So the idea at that point was, well, we didn't want to mess with the core, and it'd be nice if we had kind of loosely related tools that kind of made this all work. And so you'd have an external tool that would use iNotify or something to watch for changes on disk or on a server, and then signal to ATS that there was a traffic that was ready to go, or sorry, there was a file that was ready to reload. So again, kind of keeping that complexity outside of ATS, and then just having that external framework poke ATS when there was new things to look at. And this worked in testing, and Beneath, if he's online, worked with this. But then we all got distracted, Zayun left us, and this never really got merged back into our ATS 7 and deployed. So that then kind of got put back on the shelf. So some limitations of that approach: it's good for updates. If you never have the cert or key on the disk, though, this won't work because there's no initial load, right? Initial load isn't going to work by getting poked from the outside. Another problem with that implementation it was good for the client certs, but for the server cert, it didn't sufficiently track the policy relationship that we have, particularly if you're doing dual certs. So as you're creating an SSL CTX for a dual cert, you need to know that, well, foo.pem also needs to get loaded with foo.ec.pem when one of them gets updated. So you need to keep track of some additional policy relationships on the hot reload. But the new implementation work is leveraging off Zayun's efforts in the fact that all the work that he put in to do finer grain locking in our SSL CTX tables, we're leveraging that. So we can safely upgrade SSL CTX table entries on the fly. And that was all Zayun's earlier efforts. All right, so motivations. For us, for Verizon Media, the server certificates that we're using are all being stored in a central key server. Our cert management system generates, you create CSR requests, and it generates the certs and the keys in the central key server. If you have automatic renewals, those just show up in a month or 2 months or whenever, and they show up in the central key server. And right now, we have, our ops folks have something that goes and fetches that and puts it on disk, and it works. It's just, you have an extra step that you really probably don't need to. So there's been growing pressure for this hot reloading. I have JIRAs that are now getting to be 1.5 years, 2 years old, of saying, we really need hot reloading. Particularly, the initial pressure was for our client certs. So we use a system called Athens, which is open sourced, so I can use that name, as an authentication mechanism using MTLS, mutual TLS. And those Athens certs have a really, really short lifetime. They're on the order of hours, right? So they are cycling and changing all the time. And as it stands now, you have to have a cron job or something that pokes at traffic through server to say, hey, reload, there's new stuff for you to deal with. And if at least for the client certs, those could just magically, when they appear within 10 minutes, get pulled in. That would be greatly reduce operational complexity. So here's kind of the block diagram of what we've been working with. So we have a traffic server process. It has a plugin, which is cert loader. We have some local PEM files. We have our Athens, our client certs are still being stored on disk. because they actually, the private key gets generated on disk and the certs get created and stored on disk. So there's never any reason for them to be centralized. They're always very machine local. But then for the server certs, the SSL multi-cert files, our plugin will talk to a key server and pull that information into traffic server. There's a cert manager that will track and detect when the cert needs to be renewed, and if they're auto-renewed, we'll update them and put them into the key server. So those are the pieces: ATS, server certs in a key, central key manager, key server, and then our client certs kind of being generated on the fly, hopefully, talking to an app and server too. So what we have is some new plugin hooks, some new plugin APIs. And the new plugins are revolving around an idea of a secret. So the secrets are used for the cert and the key PEM data. So rather than pulling data directly off the disk to do our SSL CTX creations, we are pulling secrets out of our secret table. We're creating memory bios and using that then to read and generate our SSL CTXs. So there is a new hook called an SSL lifecycle, a TS lifecycle SSL secret hook, and that is triggered on each initial load and reload for every single key and cert referenced in the policy. So both client certs and server certs. And the names that are getting passed into the hook are all of the full path of that name in the config. And as a plugin, you can use the whole thing and pull things from file. You can use part of it, whatever. So your callback might look like fetch secret here, which has a continuation and an event and some data. And the eData is a TS secret ID, which includes the certificate name and the key name. So given those two pieces of information, then the plugin can go and look for the information in a central server or look for the information on disk. That's in fact how ours works. We first look for it in our central server. If it's not there, then we look for it on disk. Then we have some new plugin APIs. That hook then, it finds the secret data, the contents of the PEM file wherever. And then at that point, it will call TS SSL secret set. So it will register the name and the data with the secret table and say, okay, foo.pem, here is the data associated with foo.pem. There's also a secret get because, might as well have that. And then we also have a plugin API for hot reload. So the plugin, our plugin, will periodically go, it'll keep track of everything that we've loaded. We've loaded these names from our server, we've loaded these names from disk, this is the version from the server, this is the last timestamp that we read, and it will periodically run and wake up and look and see if there's newer versions in the server or more updated files on the disk. And if there are, we'll read that data in and call secret set again, so we'll update the secret table. And then once it's got everything updated, we'll call secret update. So in the case where you have key files and PEM files and maybe dual cert files, you want to get all of your secrets updated before you say, oh, hey, traffic server, go and recompute. So this gives you that control. So the update for client SSL CTXs is pretty easy. They are loaded on demand, so you just you remove the current entry, and the next time that client cert is used, it will get recreated. In the server cert case, it's a little bit more complicated. In that case, the core is actually on the right then going to go and look at the associated policy, pull the appropriate policy information, secret information, and recompute an SSL CTX and put it in the table at that point.
Are there any concurrency issues with this? So I'm supposed to have two plugins that are both calling secret set, and then one calls secret update before the other.
There is locking in the core.
So as long as they're not touching the same secrets, it should be okay?
Yeah, I think they're touching the same secrets.
Well, then you have other
That would
problems.
be,
You have other
that
problems.
would be a little dicey.
You
But yeah, they're
you just have lock contention at that point, wouldn't you?
you would have lock. Well, I mean, just logically, if they're both trying to change food up,
Yeah, last wins.
yeah.
Well, you have,
I would be concerned about what you're trying to do.
yeah, well, you'd have worse problems because, as you said, you want to do a bunch of secret sets and then update.
Yeah.
But you could be halfway through yours and the other guy calls update and then
Yeah.
explode.
If you have multiple plugins that are manipulating the secret table, hopefully you've kind of logically divided your
Okay.
policy, who owns what. All right, and I think I already talked to this. This is our cert loader plugin. I think I already talked to that. Periodically updates. So status, I have a PR. It needs to be updated for our latest, greatest stuff. The PR does include a test plugin that does exercise the APIs. It just pulls things off disk. It takes an element out of the path or puts an element in the path. Forget it does a transformation, so it's not just pulling things off disk directly. We have done some testing with this. Beneath has tested the loading and the updating from both the disk and our central key server. And we're getting ready for wider deployment with ATS 9. And that's one of the reasons that we really pushed forward on ATS 9, because I don't want to backport this to our ATS 7. So let's get 9 out there. This is something that we've been getting, like I said, I have JIRAs that are a couple of years old on this, so I'm getting a lot of pressure for getting some of this functionality out there. And then, who knows, maybe eventually crypto proxy, woo. So instead of having a plugin, we could have a separate crypto proxy that does all this manipulation working with the secrets, and then ATS simply proxies out the private key operations for our RSA and EC. So once GDPR is all done, or whatever the follow-on for that, and Dave gets free and I get free.
About 2025.
Yeah, someday, someday.
And not 7, and yes, 9, but 8? No.
We skipped 8, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of I did some before I got really deeply into this, I did some tidy up and fix some dual cert issues that are on master and got put into 9. So going on to that is pretty straightforward. To go into an older branch would require bringing in the refactoring as well. So it can be done. It's just more change, more risk.
Forwards ahead, not backwards.
Yep, always forward. All right. Are there any questions? Are we all stunned?
I've seen it before, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm looking at it thinking that this is a great integration point with Apache Traffic Control, because Traffic Control contains all of the SSL
Yeah.
servers. And it would be nice to get those off the cache disks.
Yep. Yeah, in our plugin, I mean, it's working with our particular key server, but certainly the structure of it, it's not a big plugin, so.
And in some regards, this is another aspect of the managed ATS, because anytime you don't have to put files on a disk, management is easier. So if you don't have to put any of the certs on the disk, that's a win.
As long as your access to the server stays up. Yeah.
If you're in a managed situation,
you have to assume some things.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. I think that's the end of the talks for today. We will resume tomorrow at 8 a.m. Mazakatsu is going to open up with Quick. Anybody have anything else? Nope. Cool.
Thanks for putting this together.
I'll stop recording and